Thanks everyone for joining us to this lunchtime panel to discuss a really interesting topic, which is very topical at all conferences. So I'm very pleased that LADUCA Auckland has helped to arrange this and convene some real experts in this area. We'll try and keep the panel today conversational. So I'll start by asking our panelists a few questions. But then if you have any questions that you'd like to ask, just please feel free to use the conference app to submit them, or feel free to be brave, as I'm sure Stephen Potter will, and put up your hand and ask. So today we're here to discuss artificial intelligence in a life insurance context, particularly around underwriting and claims, and the opportunities and the risks and the expectations that attach to that. What I did in preparing for this panel is what I think most presenters do. Unlike the politicians, I didn't have anyone write anything for me, but I did jump onto a few LLMs and I asked them the very philosophical existentialist question of what is artificial intelligence? And here's the answer that I received that I like the best, and it's from Claude for those who are playing. So this is what Claude offered up. AI brings together a collection of existing technologies and analytical techniques such as machine learning, processing unstructured data, and natural language processing in a way that resembles human intelligence through language, pattern recognition, judgment, reasoning, and learning from experience and feedback. And like any new technology, it has opportunities and it has risks. And in the context of life insurance, it's especially topical because, firstly, as an industry, we're very data-driven, but also the data that we use is often personally sensitive. Often we interface with customers in vulnerable moments, particularly at the point of claim. And also our businesses tend to be very operationally heavy as well. So what we can see here really are some of the opportunities, but also the attendant risks that follow that. And through this session today, I'd like to explore some of these themes with our panelists. So just before we get started, we've just got a very quick Q&A for all of you. It'd be great to just get a pulse in the room about you and your organisation and your level of familiarity and use of AI within your businesses. So if we could please just pop up the... Well, it's good to see as the answers are coming in, there's some reasonable familiarity. So hopefully in this conversation we can help build some knowledge and hopefully some wisdom. I'm interested to see the level of very familiar, so people actively using it within the business. So maybe that's something that we can explore through the Q&A. And for those that are just starting, then welcome to the conversation as well. So, okay, well, maybe let's get going. So maybe starting with you, Tim. Maybe just introduce yourself and your interest in today's topic.
Sure. My name is Tim. I work at January as a segment research analytics actuary for what we call the CUSAC segment, which is Canada, Sub-Saharan Africa, UK and Ireland, Australia, New Zealand, and the Caribbean. My interest in the life and health research analytics space. My interest in this topic really is threefold. I look at it from a work perspective. I do a lot of coding when it comes to coding up use cases. And then I also run the internal piloting for our underwriters and claims assessors to understand how we can utilize generative AI, but also non-generative AI, so your analytics components better, and then share it with our clients as well. Professionally, I'm very interested in this because I run the strategy on data and AI adoption for the life insurance actuarial profession in Australia. So really looking at how these technologies is going to change the ways of working, certainly for my profession. And then lastly, from a personal perspective, interested in this because I really believe this is a GPT and it's going to change the way we work and change the way we live. And so therefore, there are so many possibilities and very, very interested.
Thanks, Tim. My name's Vanessa. I'm from Swiss Re and part of the underwriting solutions team. My starting point with this topic is always how might we empower claims and underwriting professionals through the use of AI tools. And that's my starting point, which I will determinedly try to influence as much as possible, because usually the starting point is what's the ROI on the use of generative or any AI tools in a business. And when we start from that lens, I think we are looking for cost cutting and efficiency gains only, as opposed to empowering the people with vast amounts of knowledge and experience and making their jobs better and maybe more varied in terms of what they do. So that's my starting point, and I'm super curious to see where our vision on this use of these tools will go.
Thanks, Lynn. Is my mic working? Yeah. Very nice to be here. So Roger Birt, I'm at SCOR Reinsurance. I look after client solutions and data there. And part of my role is to bring some of the AI technologies that we're developing as a group to the New Zealand and Australian markets. Certainly my interest in AI, I think, is maybe a little bit more personal. I don't think a week goes by where I'm not wowed by some new use case for AI, and that might be in the work context or in a personal context. I think we all probably feel that. Maybe by a show of hands, was anybody at Eden Park over the weekend? Okay, a few of you, maybe AI didn't help the scoreline. Based on my accent, you'll probably know who I was supporting. But anyway, it was a great game. But at half-time, they had this sort of thing come on the big screen, this look-alike cam, which put a celebrity on the screen and then tried to find someone in the crowd that looked like that celebrity. And my 11-year-old daughter and I were having a lot of fun for 5 minutes, seeing how actually accurate those comparisons were. So, that was my this week's wow factor for AI. But generally in the work context, I'm often wowed by it. And I think we all as an industry have an opportunity to embrace it and innovate off that. But with that comes a huge responsibility. And, we're an industry built over hundreds of years on trust. And we can easily break that trust if we're irresponsible with it. So I'm passionate from both of those two lenses.
Yeah, thanks, Roger. And don't worry, there's still the Wellington game around the corner, so opportunities abound. Okay, maybe we can focus a little bit about exploring the benefits of AI. And Vanessa, you touched on this earlier in your opening comments. Can you maybe just share some practical examples of how life insurers are using AI within a claims and underwriting context?
Yes, for sure. So I think my mic is...
Try mine. Yeah.
Thank you. Yes, so across the globe, as you can imagine, the range of maturity in the space varies quite significantly. So we have very few players right at the optimal end for now, because obviously things will change dramatically over the coming years, but very few insurers, life insurers, who are playing in the agentic AI space. So they've really gone to the nth degree for now in terms of using various different systems to talk to one another and to do what they need to do there. But most of us are not close to that. We're usually down the other end. And based on even the earlier poll, it is, if you are here sitting here thinking, well, my organisation has done barely anything in this space, you are definitely not alone. But others have moved at pace and moved quickly ahead. So in terms of what's happening that's tangible, across both claims and underwriting, the evidence summarisation piece has really come to the fore. So various different tools that are using OCR and various models to extract and structure data are really key. Now, that may seem quite foundational, but for the claims and underwriting professionals in the room, you know how many hours you have spent trawling through many, many documents to get to an outcome before you've even made a decision on what that case will become. So that extraction and structuring of data is really fundamental in order for the AI tools that come later to be able to use that. Everything is data-driven, right? So that's happening. And in the claims space, in addition to that, the kind of next step has been around utilising claims rules, so deterministic rules plus generative AI. And that means that the generative AI can then prompt that lovely structured data that now exists to drive the next step forward. And then ultimately, something that Swiss Re has done more broadly and others are doing as well is that you would ideally have that nice almost end-to-end piece around a true digital intake. Then you'd have an AI-enabled claim administration, always human in the loop. That's really essential here, especially in claims, followed by the automation of assessment and a triaging. So that kind of flow is underway, but still early stages for most insurers across the world. Then in the underwriting space, now I was involved with underwriting automation when it kicked off 15 or so years ago in ANZ, and I thought that we'd be further along than we are, to be honest. So most insurers invested a chunk of money to purchase an underwriting rules engine. They put a couple of people on that, and they have evolved, but that beautiful structured data that has been being collected for a decade or more hasn't been mined hugely. So in the underwriting space, you could say there's a step ahead because the data is there, but what to do with that now? So the evidence summarisation will be excellent, utilising tools that can then draw from underwriting manuals. So therefore you've got the structured data, you've got the intake has occurred digitally, then you can draw from an underwriting manual to get a risk assessment outcome. Those are all steps forward, but always with human in the loop. So that's certainly my approach with that.
Yeah, thanks for sharing those practical examples. And I've actually personally had a bit of a play with that as well in a secure way, but it's pretty amazing what it can do in terms of incorporating the underwriting guidelines and manual to then interpret the actual medical information that's presented. So thank you for that. Roger, how is AI currently reshaping the industry? And if we look forward over the next 1 to 3 years, what are the major shifts that you expect to see, both for insurers as well as for reinsurers?
Thanks, Len. Seems like we've got a bit of microphone passing along here. Yeah, thanks, Len. I think when people talk about AI, two people might be talking about that topic, but might be talking about very different things. And, there's very traditional versions of AI, and I think we sort of referenced that a little bit earlier. There are actually many insurers that are fully adopting traditional versions of AI, so maybe we can sort of start there. That's pretty well established and maybe to some extent feels a little bit outdated now. But if I think about sort of 5 to 10 years ago, machine learning models that were driving sales campaigns or retention activity with propensity to be retained activity in call centers, those are all, pretty well developed. I think there aren't many examples of insurers that aren't adopting those sorts of things. I remember I was at a direct insurer 5 years ago. We were talking to, using natural language processing to scan emails and direct workflow to different channels. And it was a huge effort to actually, train models to do that. And now it really feels a little bit clunky. And given where we are in generative AI, it feels like it's a lot easier to achieve. With generative AI coming in, just to help sort of express the magnitude of the pace of change there, and I think we all pretty much feel it. But when GPT 1.0 came in 2017, we didn't know it yet. OpenAI only released their versions later in time. It was being trained on about 110 million parameters, and that seems like a big number. And I don't need to understand exactly what that means. But a month ago, 5.0 was released, and they haven't publicized exactly how many parameters have been used in training that version, but the guesses are about 50 trillion. Now, the comparison between those two numbers maybe is a bit hard to comprehend, but it's going from the sort of Auckland Tower all the way to halfway to the moon. That's the order of magnitude of change. So you can appreciate how sophisticated the generative AI models are now getting. And now what does that mean for us? We've gone from a world of maybe forms and batch processing and questions that are all the same to everybody, to digitizing the back office in a lean mindset, and very linear processes take sort of a lot of costs out of the system. I think maybe some of the rules engines maybe a little bit like that because they're very discrete, into a world of generative AI where we can really embrace far more personalized experiences for individuals. So it's no longer the case that we're constrained by a certain subset of rules, but the degree of personalization can now be exaggerated. And I think that concept or that comment of hyper-personalization was used probably 5 years ago. But probably with the technology now, we're probably a lot closer to what that means. If we bring in our agentic AI and AI agents managing workflows, it's not hard to comprehend a scenario where an individual might be shopping around for insurance. They might go through a sort of an intake process where data is collected, autonomously, essentially through unstructured forms or unstructured sources. An agent might then sort of scan to see and converse maybe with the customer themselves or the intermediary to find gaps in those data sources. It passes maybe then on to a risk agent, which then assesses medical reports or X-rays or financial statements and conducts that underwriting. And I think we're certainly seeing those pilots starting to emerge, as Vanessa mentioned just now. It then might move on to a product engine, which then chooses the best sort of suite of products that are possible for that individual, and perhaps pricing then comes into play, which is far more than just the finite set of pricing factors that we have today. So, I mean, these all sound very futuristic, but given the pace at which things have moved over the last 3 years or 5 years, I don't think it's hard to imagine that these elements could be some reality. Maybe we're closer to their deployment for certain of them, but further away for others. I think maybe one last comment is that based on a report from McKinsey that I read ahead of this, the difference between the leaders and the laggers on AI adoption in the insurance sector have about a 6 times multiple in their results based on some assessment that they had done. And that delta was probably the biggest for the insurance sector. And I think the foundations of that, the real reason for that is the AI is now able to provide reason and judgment and even empathy. If you look at how OpenAI is broadcasting the most recent models, they say empathy is now a stronger feature, and the insurance sector is very ripe for those characteristics out of the technology. So I know I've talked a lot about the opportunity. I think maybe some of the conversation will be about the risks to that as we move forward.
If I may add a couple of things there before we move on to the next topic. Probably a couple of use cases that I've seen around also is around voice analytics. So in particular, how to interpret calls to identify vulnerable customers that they're being taken care of, which of course is very, very important for our customers and for our brand of the industry. Another one is probably it's pre-Gen AI as well, but because of the improved optical character recognition and then the ability to link sources together of the Gen AI technology, it's around fraud analytics as well, and improvement of how to identify frauds efficiently, which is beneficial for everyone. Just to add on to Roger's point around future, what I want to share is when I go and talk to clients and we talk and we'll ask questions, I can generally band those questions into 3 categories. And I think it's useful to think about it from this angle when it comes to what the future would be, because the questions that people ask are generally where the resources will be invested, right? And what I want to point out in those 3 categories in general are how do we create smart efficiencies? How do we use our data better? And how do we sell better? Smart efficiency, Vanessa has talked a lot about around creating that data flow. That's probably that will continue to be where, in my view, where money will be invested in. And then as we have data that is clean, of course, then there's more insights. But to Roger's point earlier as well, that ability of hyper-personalization, absolutely right. The ability to communicate with our customers in a more regular manner absolutely is where I think the technology is going to go to.
Maybe just keep the mic, Tim. So just shifting focus a little bit on the risk side. So from a very practical perspective, what do you see as some of the key issues that may slow insurers in embracing AI? And what are some practical things that the people in this audience can do when they go back to their businesses, just try and accelerate it?
Yeah, so this might come to be a very off-field answer as I've prepared for this. And I say it for the following reason. When I look at Gen AI or AI as a general purpose technology, and versus other general purpose technology in the past, so for example, computer, we are actually adopting this technology a lot quicker than the other ones. Think about when mainframe came in, then onto the laptops, and then onto our phones, and how many years that has taken for that to actually become our day-to-day life. We're talking about 50, 60 years. So that's the first point. The second point around general purpose technology is that over what we call the J-curve, right? Basically, in the early stages, we would overestimate the impact of general purpose technology in the early periods before getting to a point where we underestimate the impact. And those 2 points are really important as I answer this question because, okay, we are going quite quickly compared to history, but we are also likely to overestimate the impact. So what does that mean, and what does it mean from a slowness perspective? What kind of risks are there? In my opinion, I think the key risk here is that we are already doing very quick. We're already adopting very quickly compared to history, and we're overestimating, and then we become frustrated. The doers, the coders, the builders are getting frustrated that actually I'm trying my best. I'm doing it very quickly, but the expectation, the bar continues to be higher. So what does it mean from a practical perspective? I think it's around, well, again, looking at history of GPTs, how can we ensure that we get to the point of where the high overestimation is tending to zero, i.e. the overestimation of impact is closer to the actual impact of the technology. And I think to do that, again, I'll go back to three potential actions to Lynn's point. First is, as an individual, give it a try. Understand that there will be overestimation. So when I code use cases up, when I try to build tools as part of building agents, I know that I'm going to make mistakes. I know that there's going to be high expectations, but it's okay. At an organization level, I think it's around running more use cases, running more pilots, creating a safe environment to actually test those cases, because it's only through testings that the organization is going to understand what the goods are and also what the not so goods are, and it's okay. And then from a profession perspective, certainly I can only speak for the actuarial profession. What I'm trying to do for the life insurance actuarial profession is to be able to run groups, to share insights, to share use cases such that knowledge curve is accelerated.
Great, thank you.
Maybe I can add sort of just something that this might sound like a marketing if it is not intended to be, but as reinsurers, we're all sitting here with AI solutions. I think anybody that's developing AI solutions is largely leveraging the same large suite of large language models. There's a finite level of providers that are actually in that space. So we're all leveraging the same technology, and those that are not in the insurance sector and technology providers are all doing the same. I think the one thing that probably resonates in the conversations that I have is, to what extent is there skin in the game? Like any investment, skin in the game is adequate, and if there's an alignment of interest, and if there's adoption within, a partner like a reinsurer, certainly that has a lot of credibility to that, because we live and die by the same risks, as an organisation as the insurers would. So I think that's maybe a key point that certainly that has resonated in the conversations that I'm having on alignment of interest and skin in the game in terms of adoption.
Thank you. And Roger, just sort of a follow-up question then. If we sort of think about, I guess, the public interest and community expectations in the industry that we're in, and as I mentioned in the beginning, often we're dealing with customers in vulnerable circumstances, particularly a claim. How do we think about striking the right balance between the use of AI, or maybe some of the use cases or processes that use AI versus the human oversight to maintain the fairness, the trust and accuracy of our decisions?
Yeah, I mean, that's the key question, right? I mean, as I said earlier, we're an industry that's built on 100 years of, more than many years of trust, and we don't want that broken. Maybe if I deal with each of those sort of concepts on their own, on accuracy, that's always one of the first questions that gets asked, when developing any or delivering any AI solution to a client. And the answer is never 100%. It's always in the high percentages, but it's never 100%. And the question then becomes, is it a bit of an uncomfortable silence? How do we trust this thing? Can we even move forward? But then the next comment usually comes from the insurer. Okay, but are our humans at 100%? And the answer is probably no. There isn't necessarily accuracy in every system. And I think how we've sort of navigated that is, and just sort of touching on some of the poll questions and how we attempt to get into AI and maybe trust it, is to think about the use cases in a more practical sense. So are we, going full hog and allowing these solutions to make decisions on our behalf, or are there sort of lower risk use cases that can be adopted? A good example that we've considered in certain markets around the world is, pre-assessments in the underwriting space, where you're not contracting with a client, but you're providing an indication, of an underwriting outcome. There's obviously caveats to that. Does that lower the risk, as an example? Could you, instead of using AI to actually make the decisions, could you say, let me use AI to triage cases, and if it's detecting a case with a condition, it goes into a human queue versus going, directly into a clean skin queue, which could accelerate the decision. So I think there's a peeling back of the risk that enables maybe more fluidity of adoption in AI. Maybe on some of the other points on fairness and consistency, and maybe the trust element, I think it's a bit of a similar thing. To what extent are we all consistent as humans? Maybe there's an element of discrepancies there. AI is a little bit about a good friend. You ask it a question, and then a couple of hours later you ask the same question, it might still give you a different answer, but still make you feel good. So I think there's an element of do we consider the use cases that are ripe for AI, and how does trust is maybe a bit of a double-edged sword. What are the expectations of our customers if they have a very simple claim, as an example, talking to the claims use case that has very clear, clean-cut rules? Can you narrow the parameterizations of options that AI needs to deal with? And if it's very simple, like I broke my leg and I need 6 months of a benefit payment, maybe that AI can deal with those issues and very quickly, because there's obviously an opportunity for speed there, which is also a trust element, versus others that I want to talk to a genuine human about a mental health issue, and consequently I'll get that from my insurer.
Yeah, thanks, Roger. A question for you, Vanessa, just following on from the point that Roger made around, I guess, the developing and establishing the trust. Like, do you have any sort of insights between like the approaches that you might take in validating underwriting rules engines, and maybe some of the QA strategies that apply to those, and then how those maybe compare and contrast with the quality assurance over like AI type of models and the outcomes that they present? Do you see a difference between them? And if so, maybe what are some of those differences?
Thanks for the off-the-cuff question, Len. So with underwriting rules engines, they're deterministic rules, right? So the engine is given clear parameters. You can do, you have input A, you give output B. And so the QA around that is probably more simple, as in, did the engine follow the rule? Yes or no. With generative AI, because it can use a level of reasoning, I think the QA approach will need to be different. I don't know if you guys have seen that in practice, but if I think of, for example, Swiss Re's underwriting manual, it's called Life Guide, all the reinsurers have an underwriting manual, all be familiar with that. Our generative AI bot within that is called Scout. And so you can go into Scout and type in some parameters, 49-year-old female, non-smoker, type 2 diabetes, blah, blah, and get an output from Scout. Now, generally, Scout will direct you to an appropriate rating outcome, or give you some additional information, or say things like, to profile this risk, you may need to find out A, B, and C. So it's a guide to that. However, you can ask Scout that same question a day later and get a slightly different answer, right? So not necessarily wrong, but it's worded differently. It's using reasoning, and these tools will learn. So the more that we ask them questions or pose these scenarios, the smarter, hopefully, they will get. I guess it could be a matter of garbage in, garbage out, though. So yes, I do think the approach would need to be different.
Yeah, it makes sense. It sounds like that's more of an approach that you would take with a human underwriter, because it's, I guess, essentially following human-style judgment. So Tim, just kind of generalizing that question. So we've talked a little bit about the efficiency benefits, but how, like, if you're an insurer or reinsurer looking at considering an AI use case, how do you sort of, on the one hand, you've got the efficiency benefits that come from implementing it, but on the other hand, there's risks potentially, claims leakage or things like this. How do insurers go about kind of validating that use case?
Yeah, just to show how quick these things are moving. As I was reading a post last week, there's now someone who came out, I think the paper is meant to come out this week, to quantify the amount of information that will lead to have a formula to have an equation that can quantify the amount of information that will lead to a lower hallucination rate. So I mean, it makes sense, right? More information, lower hallucination. But to be able to formulate that now, that's how quick these things are going. Now, to answer your question, Len, around financial slippage, essentially, relative to efficiency gain, I want to point out that it can be both in this place, in this space, in this Gen AI space, and for the following reason. Historically, when we look at accelerated underwriting, we will look at, okay, well, we'll follow rules and then we're going to get efficiency gain, but the trade-off is, of course, we're going to have a higher mortality or morbidity rate in the book as a result. But in my view, in this early stage Gen AI, still very early stage, as I said earlier, I think there are opportunities where we are able to get efficiency gain without actually giving up risk management related items. And so it's at this stage, right, it's being able to find those cases. So a lot of it, from what I see, is around actually extraction of data to decrease administration burden, and then utilizing data as insights. Generally, to me, it doesn't actually increase the risk to the company, but certainly increases the efficiency of the company.
Maybe, sorry. Just to add to that, luckily we had a sort of the regulatory talk earlier. Luckily, the regulation is sort of keeping pace to some extent with the risks that might be faced. And about a year ago, the EU AI Act came into effect. And if you read through that act, it actually distinguishes between high-risk AI activities and has a degree of controls over that or expectations on that, which rely on a good understanding of what the AI is actually doing. It requires a human involvement that can sort of turn off a process if they believe that the AI is not working correctly, and not just one human, more than one. It actually specifies that, and a number of other things. So the regulation is trying to make sure that it protects these high-risk AI activities. And you might be asking yourself, what does it see as, or what does the regulators see as high-risk AI activities? And this is, remember, across all industries. It's things like AI systems that manage traffic flow and might sort of influence people's wellness or even basic rights. There's the aspects relating to employment applications, and if AI is kicking out individuals who are not qualified for a certain criteria but are hallucinating by doing that, that's a problem. And then credit scoring, obviously the bank's also part of this conference. Credit scoring is also in there, and so is assessments of health and life insurance from a risk perspective and a pricing perspective. So, all of these are deemed to be high risk activities, and therefore the regulation actually putting controls in place to try and manage that as effectively as possible.
And if I may add to that as well, so the EU AI Act, as Roger has mentioned, there's high risk AI, there's also prohibited AI, so understanding those two components are quite important. But also I think it's really one thing that I realized as I searched through this to understand, well, to Lynn's definition of AI earlier, where does regression actually come in? Is it AI or not? And then it's really interesting because when the EU AI Act first came out in July 2024, it wasn't very clear. It wasn't until they released a separate memo on defining the definitions of what is AI that bit has been clarified. So regression is not unless it's part of an automated decision system. And that automated decision system is quite important because if me working as a reinsurer and I'm supporting the pricing team, I'm not actually automating the decision to the direct customer, right? I'm going to go through a pricing actuary, the regional chief actuary, and then it's going to go to the direct insurer. But of course, if it's actually in a direct to customer scenario, then that decision could be automated. The system might be learning from it. Then that actually falls under the scope of the EU AI Act. Goes to show how quick this is going. If legal is actually catching up, going back to the computer scenario, when did the first legal act or for computers actually come in versus how quick we're getting this now on the EU AI Act?
Yeah, that's right. I think I've been sort of following some of the AI-related laws, and it's very clear that however it develops, will end up shaping some of the use cases. I've got a question here from the floor for really any or all of you, and it's related to this theme. So the question is, surveys show that New Zealanders have low trust of AI compared to OECD, and I think it's true in Australia as well. Can you speculate on why that is? What's so special or unusual about our part of the world?
Well, I'm not from New Zealand, so maybe it's a bit of a hard question for me to answer. But I think there's a general sense of fear. When I was sitting at a claims conference a couple of weeks ago, and there was somebody on the panel that was talking about AI and all the great things it could do, and the claims assessors behind me were saying, "I'm not going to have a job in 3 years," and that's real. You can sort of feel that sort of in their response. I'm not sure if this really answers the question why New Zealand might be different, but my feeling is that there is a great sense of fear as a result of this. And I know we're going to maybe be talking about that in a moment. I think my response to that would be, how do people then change their mindset to see how they can leverage the technology rather than being fearful of it, and actually enable them to do their jobs better.
Okay.
Sorry, Len, was this from a consumer perspective, fear of AI, or we're talking about people in our professions?
No, well, I think it's in general. I think it's just the general social observation.
Yeah. Okay, so ANZ is a very special part of the world, as we all know. So as a Kiwi who lives in Australia, I can say that I think on behalf of both sides of the Tasman. But perhaps the lack of trust more broadly is the use of the data, right? Most of us shudder to think what could happen to personal and sensitive information should it be released in some way. However, most of us do have our little wee smartphones that we share a whole bunch of stuff on, and we do our banking on and so on. So I think trust will be built, well, it will need to be built, but how we go about that is really important. What I do appreciate about the use of various tools is that ideally there'll be a transparency and an auditable trail, if you like. We should be able to, there should never be a black box, of course, and that's going to be essential for us to keep compliant even with the various codes that we all follow. But importantly, from a human perspective, when we hand over that sensitive or personal information, we want to ensure that it's been used for the right purpose. And it's back to the trust point that Roger has touched on a few times. It's essential. And the onus is on us as an industry to make sure that remains so.
I'll add a couple, and I'll comment more from my experience in working with the different underwriters and claims assessors in the company I work for across the regions, and how when I interpret their feelings, what makes their experience different. And that's probably a good proxy of their background. And what I see is the following. In countries where data is quite heavily used already, so for example, South Africa, their fear factor is a little bit lower. Quote unquote fear factor is a little bit lower versus other countries where the sentiment is a little bit where the fear factor is higher. So from that experience of piloting with them, I would think, or at least my guess there is that the level of familiarity with the knowledge and the data, so quite similar to the J-curve I said earlier, because they know they have experienced the data and AI a little bit more, so the gap between the expectation versus reality is closer, so they get more comfort. To your point earlier, Vanessa, with the Internet of Things that has been happening over the last 10 years, everything is connected. I think that will naturally wane closer and closer. People were scared about computers, and we're now scared about Gen AI, and in a few years' time, maybe we'll be okay.
I think that's right, until general AI comes along, and then... okay. So I guess now taking it down to some of the, to a much more practical level for those underwriting and claims professionals, Vanessa, what can they be doing today to prepare themselves for the impact of AI shaping their roles?
Yeah, really key question, of course, for all the claims and underwriting professionals in the room. As Roger pointed out earlier, certainly there seems to be concern about how this will impact roles. And it's likely that it will impact roles, but I wonder if it will impact it in different ways to what we may fear that it's going to do. So back to my very opening statement around how might we empower claims and underwriting professionals through the use of AI tools. If we can humour me for a moment and take that lens and consider how these tools will empower but also enhance the experience and knowledge that these professionals have built up, some over many years, I think that is a helpful place to begin. But I would roll out the 3 E's in terms of educate, experiment and evangelise. So when I look at myself, I need to educate myself around what these tools are and how they might be used. Be willing to experiment with them. Now, I don't know if within your organisations there's already room or space to do that, and if not, perhaps that is something for you to lead or to raise, to say, well, if we're going to utilise these tools, we need some enterprise level arrangement or agreement in a safe space to play with those in. And then the evangelise piece is around, those who are going to lead this space will have experimented and be able to tell that story to say, look how the use of this tool in our domain, so if we just think encapsulating underwriting or claims within our domain, we've been able to improve customer outcomes in this way. I think that's an excellent measure to have, but if this is not being led by claims and underwriting professionals, the chances are that, with all respect to C-suite leaders, they're probably coming at it from the angle of return on investment. And so my encouragement would be to drive that conversation if you're not already. And to seek that advocacy, if you like, for the use of these tools in a smart and measurable way. The empathy, the level of understanding, all of that knowledge that's been retained is really, really important. And whilst some of these tools are becoming more sophisticated, I don't see that taking over in the near future. But maybe the roles will also change in terms of from a traditional, underwriters are doing only this piece of the puzzle, if you like. Maybe they will evolve or expand to becoming more like portfolio managers. So imagine we've long talked about that nirvana, that where the claims and underwriting feedback loop, we can follow through from pre-assessment right through to claims outcome, and we have that structured data that can tell that story. I think we're closer to that. And so with the knowledge and experience that people in this room have already gathered over the years, how can we complete that story? So if we're going to be a truly data-driven industry, which we often claim to be, and yet I fear that we don't trust our own data very much, we haven't utilised it, perhaps this is where underwriting and claims professionals can step into that breach and help with that story and the construction of what's to come. So I'm big on let's determine our future here.
I think, I was just going to say, like my perspective on it as well is it also sort of unlocks the value of time for the underwriters to add value. And so, for those insurers that operate with advisors, one of the common complaints is about the service experience because of a lack of availability of underwriters, because the underwriters are busy working through X number of cases a day. And so if you could make them more efficient, it would then unlock the time to be able to both sort of perform QA over the decision, but then also to spend time with the advisor gathering maybe more information to refine it. So I think it can actually unlock a category of value and possibly unlocking value that the underwriters themselves enjoy rather than just going through all of the information. Yeah.
Yes, and I understand there might be some advisors represented in the room. So to that point, the things like pre-assessments, right? And I understand that's advisors want to gain some comfort that if they've got, customer X and there's some conditions that need special attention. They want to get some comfort ahead of time as they prepare to discuss that with the client. Certainly for many insurers in the room and across Australia, the volume of pre-assessments has completely blown out, right? And it's taking valuable time to spend time on doing those, and all insurers want to do that well. However, the cases that are sitting in the queue to be accepted and actually put on the books, that may distract from that. So I think is an excellent use case for allowing certain tools to help with the triaging there, to give comfort to the advisors that they can go with confidence to talk with their customers, but also allow the underwriters generally love, well, I should say this with care, generally love speaking to advisors about complex cases when it's a meaningful discussion. It helps everyone, right? It helps the customer, it helps set expectations, it helps to gather the right information. And so that's time well spent.
Sorry, Len, I just wanted to, maybe it's the same theme, but on the claims side, certainly in the Australian market, just to talk about that market, there has been an increase in volume, in claims, and there's not an abundance of claims assessments to go fulfill that volume demand. But also the demand has been for more complex claims, so there's a lot of complexity to those, and therefore isn't AI the necessary solution actually to try and deal with the less complex, get those out of the queue and have a better experience for all claimants, essentially, because you're getting the intimacy where it's needed, similar to the advisor in the underwriting space, and the speed where it's needed, but not cross-pollinating those two things. So I think it's probably a necessity in certain contexts rather than something to fear.
No, thank you. I agree. Time does feel very precious, and people can add a lot of value in their interaction. So anything that unlocks that, I think, will, may well be reinvested as a better service experience.
Yeah, if I may add a couple. The first one around pre-assessment is actually really, really important. I look at one of the markets that I work with, which is Canada. It has a lot of facultative cases, which it's quite similar to pre-assessments, right? As I was working with the underwriters there, I realized there's a very, very high decline rate. Let's say 50%. Let's say Reinsurance, I have 7 underwriters there. That means each year we spend 3.5 FTEs in declining cases. Not good for the customer, not good for the company. So finding an efficient way to actually go, well, okay, we're going to say of that 50% of cases, we're not going to look at 25% of them. Actually spending time looking at the rest probably means we can bring more revenue, and we probably can give more acceptance as well, because we're going to talk more, to your point, to the client, and then is a better outcome for everyone. I also want to share around what probably one key insight around what the underwriters and claims assessors have told me as they went through the pilot. And it's quite close. I feel quite close to this, because what they've said is as they're going through it, they lost a sense of touch, feel for the game, because they're reading less. And it's really, really interesting, because if I go down to, in a few weeks' time, there's a session where we talk to retired actuaries, and one of the questions I'm going to ask them is, well, what happened when computers came in? We are no longer using hand to write formulas to calculate answers. How did you get a feel for the game? And in my pre-discussions with them, it's quite similar. It's something that we'll get used to, right? We're going to read less. We're going to be more efficient. We're going to make decisions. We know what to look for because we understand what's going on behind it. And so I think to answer Lynn's original question around, well, what's the key takeaway as technology comes in this case, I think is embracing the change, understanding that the field will be different, and then finding ways to make yourself comfortable.
Thank you. Now, look, I've tried to cover off most of the questions that have come through, but there's maybe a final one just before we wrap up. So from an insurer perspective, electronic health records have always been sort of nirvana. And unfortunately, with some limited exceptions around the world, most governments and most healthcare systems have kind of failed to deliver that. To what extent does AI and LLMs, to what extent do they kind of negate the need for an electronic health record? Do we have the tools now to just be able to read in, PDF documents that are collated by, a GP or a doctor, and then just sort of aggregate all of that? What is from your perspective, are we losing anything now by not having an electronic health record? Only from an insurer perspective, obviously not from a healthcare provision perspective.
Maybe I'll comment on the optical character recognition capability. I mean, this is one of the pleasant surprises of Gen AI coming in. OCR capabilities has improved so much over the last 4 years. When I first started coding, I really struggled with OCR. It was basically impossible to get readily available OCR software to use. And then after actually extracting the data, the natural language process component, tokenizing, etc., embeddings, very, very difficult to do quickly. Nowadays, we actually have those available. What that means, to answer the question, from a data extraction perspective, we are able to extract handwriting, various documents, various words, etc., quickly. The caveat, I think, is where I see actually there are a lot of investment going in this area, but certainly it's not perfect or not at a stage where I think is as usable yet is image recognition. And then how do we actually interpret graphs from those images? That's still being developed, and I think that's an area where health records might do better.
Yeah, I hadn't considered it before from that perspective that electronic health records for our purposes may not be necessary, but I don't know that they will be, because as Tim has pointed out, the tech is there and it can extract and structure and summarise very well now. And so there are lots and lots of vendors playing in this space around the globe now, of course, and I think the trick will be for insurers to partner well. Perhaps don't try to build it yourselves, just partner with someone who's doing it well and who's trustworthy. But I think that's an exciting aspect, and even if we can't get the images yet, those who's had to trawl through a 250-page PMAR and try to extract stuff, and 90% of it doesn't mean anything meaningful, right? So to know that these tools can extract that, structure it, and now even summarise it for us, so to pull out those key things and present that to an underwriter, for example, or to a claims assessor so that they can see that up front. That's already saved a bunch of time on less meaningful things. Of course, it will need to be tested, QA'd to the nth degree, but yeah, like humans, it may miss something.
Maybe my last point on this is, besides replacing the opportunity for electronic health records, what does it do to enhance that? I mean, what in our experience, in some of the technologies that's been developed, you can detect anomalies in the content that has been provided. So you might have a 30-page document that's got 3 different versions of a blood pressure reading, and maybe the context of that is also somewhere buried in those documents. Gen AI can now extract that and elevate that compared to maybe an electronic health record, which would have detected just one of those components, and then you trust that. So I think there's a delta as well as a result of the technology that enables us to now not just trust one data source, but actually look at it more holistically.
Well, thank you, and thanks everyone for your questions. So just to wrap up in the final couple of minutes, maybe a question for all of you, starting with you, Roger. What's your single best piece of advice for how we can, as insurance practitioners, prepare for the tech?
I think it starts with the people, to be honest. I think if people aren't buying into it, if the leadership aren't endorsing the use of AI, I mean, if I just think about my personal journey, I was fearful of using the technology in my day job because I felt I've been hired and paid to do, all parts of it. But now, am I cheating if I, have a report summarized by Gen AI, and will they be looked down on? And certainly, my organisation don't see it that way. They endorse, their behaviour. So if you get people experimenting and buying into the opportunity, I think that's certainly a substantial portion of the battle that has been won. And I think we're not short of problems to solve as an industry. So, can AI then be used to solve some of those problems? But the people, it has to start with the people.
Yes, wholeheartedly agree with Roger there. And I just come back to the 3 E's that I said earlier about educating ourselves, and that's going to be ongoing, right? Experimenting as much as we are able to, and then evangelising. So share the results of those experiments with your broader team, with your leaders, so on and so forth.
Thank you. For me is give it a try and be patient.
Great. Thanks, Tim. Okay, well, thank you everyone for joining today's session, and thank you very much for our panelists that just provide a lot of insight and a lot of wisdom to the conversation. So thank you. I'm sure we'll be able to keep the conversation going over the next day. So just please feel free to pop off and have a conversation with the guys. Otherwise, thank you all and have a great couple of days ahead. Thank you.